Welcome to Season 7 of Any Given Runway. I'm your host, Randall Brown. Through conversations, books, and the occasional rabbit hole, this show explores creativity, curiosity, and the stories that shape us. Everyone has a story, each person is a scholar. Today's guest is author Ronan O'Shea. Ronan is a London author, journalist, and creative writing teacher whose work has appeared in publications including The Independent, The Telegraph, and National Geographic Traveler. His latest novel, Murphy Who Talks, follows a pub owner whose decision to ban phones and eventually conversation itself sparks a witty and thought-provoking look at communication, community, and modern life. On today's episode, Ronan and I talk about the challenges of maintaining humor throughout the duration of a book. We talk about how he best captured the vibe of London, and we discuss how his background in journalism impacted writing a novel. Murphy Who Talks was a very, very fun book, and you might be wondering, is this book for you? Well, this book is for you if you enjoy offbeat humor, memorable characters, stories that make you laugh while quickly asking bigger questions about life. It's also those for who like Irish wit, quirky settings, and quirky concepts. And it's also for those true psychos who want to relive the 2018 World Cup. It might be a great time to reminisce, but I'm still not over Mandzukic. It's a book I can summarize in 2 ratings. It earns 4 bags of crisps from me and, of course, 0 mobile phones. With that being said, let's go ahead and welcome on author Ronan O'Shea, author of Murphy Who Talks, and let's learn. Your newest book, Murphy Who Talks. Tell me about the premise of it and what inspired its creation.
Yeah, so Murphy Who Talks is in short is about a man who turns the pub where he works into London's first silent pub, in inverted commas. Basically, the pub gets threatened with closure. He's just a barman; he doesn't own it, but he comes up with this wacky scheme to save it from closure. It's threatened with closure because of a building development next door, and he decides to gradually sort of make changes. He starts by banning phones, and then he wants it to be silence altogether in the pub. Really, he has ulterior motives, but the premise was that it was, what's really going on in the background. I suppose I wrote it around a couple of years after the Brexit vote happened, and I was very interested in what had been communicated with us versus what we knew and or what wasn't communicated. And I think it kind of stemmed from there, even though it's not obviously about any of those, the bigger political things. I think that was the sort of germ of what was going on in my head at the time. I think when I first started writing it, this pub thing wasn't there at all. Like that came later. I think when I first started writing, it was basically about a guy who worked in an office and fancied a girl he worked with, and it was, as you can imagine, a very bad first draft. That wasn't very interesting. I came upon the idea of the silent pub later on as I was developing the character of Murphy, and then it kind of, for want of a better phrase, things started to fall together, and it kind of went from there.
Well, that's fascinating because that's your tagline for your book, and you're telling me that came last. That was the last thing that you constructed.
Yeah. I think, it would make logical sense. That would be like, oh, I had this flashbulb moment before I wrote anything I want to write about a silent pub, but it wasn't even set in a pub when I first wrote it. I think I even did a first draft in full before the pub happened, and I actually. My memory's a bit hazy. I know we'll get onto this another question of when I wrote it, but it was mostly written around the time it's set and a bit later. But I was a journalist and I moved home with my mum in 2019 or the end of 2018 and was living at home. And I, for one reason or another, I got a full-time job that didn't work out. And then I ended up working in a bar. Again, I've done a lot of bar work over the years. And it was while working in a bar one day, I suddenly realized, oh my God, this book has to be set in pubs. What am I doing? Because I already knew it was about communication and how we don't communicate with each other properly, or particularly around our post-Brexit period, how differing sides don't really get to hear one another and really hear each other's point of view. So I thought, that's not how offices work, actually. Most offices that I've worked in, most people are pretty similar. They're middle class. They share the same politics, broadly speaking. They kind of agree with each other on most things, it's not going to work. And then I suddenly had this realization, oh, actually, pubs is still one of the few places where people are very differing backgrounds and points of view with limits. Obviously, there are pubs that attract people, of certain money, background, etc., depending on cost. But it's the setting that works for the kind of book I was trying to write. But that only came out later, and I think the idea of the silent pub came out of I was doing various writing exercises that helped me to develop ideas, and one is to just I think it's called like what if. You write what if and think of any scenario you can, and I had all sorts of things I'd written down. I think one of them may have been like what if I can't remember if Murphy was there yet, but what if the main character banned talking in the pub, and then that suddenly after I'd had to say realization that it needed to be in pubs. Maybe a few months later, I had the realization, oh, actually, this guy is the kind of guy who could come up with this kind of scheme, and it kind of unfolded from there.
Well, you answered it partly my next question as far as when you wrote it, because as I'm reading it, I notice there are a lot of parallels to the setting of the book then and what's going on now. World Cup,
Yeah.
sweltering heat, and also a lot of still the same political division and political stories going on. So when you went back and were completing it, how did you conduct some of the research going, like kind of in retrospectively?
Well, like I said, like most of it was actually written closer to that time. Yeah, I feel like maybe I'm some sort of oracle, or it's that just what was going to happen and what's happening now was pretty plainly obvious to a lot of people who were watching. I think that's probably more the case. I think that was on my mind of, when I started writing, I wanted to just be like, what's going on now in the world, or particularly in the UK. And it was kind of clear to me that things were not going in the right direction, as from my point of view. But in terms of the research, I think I just went backwards and made sure, let's say a year or two later that the details were correct. But I was quite meticulous with, I mean, it's not a meticulously researched novel in the sense that I don't have to know, a certain part of history amazingly well, or there's not a huge cast of characters, etc. But I do remember that I did simple things like I actually printed out all the results of that World Cup when it's set, just so I knew I had everything correct, but also as a framing device to be like, okay, so should it be set should it start in June, or should it start in April, or May or March? And I think when I started, or even when early on, it was actually set at the beginning in June, and gradually I worked backwards because I realized it should sort of come into that World Cup rather than be in the midst of it. But yeah, in terms of research, my research was more kind of diligent but light, if that makes sense, in that I just made sure I'd covered my tracks on everything. I didn't make mistakes, as it were. But yeah, I suppose because it was relatively close to the time, it wasn't too hard to recall what was going on.
Yeah, and as I was reading it, I actually was going back and cross-checking this too because I was just you were spurring some of the memories. I'm like, oh, they did score against them and they did play that. So I was going back and
Yeah.
so that's what made me first think of that. When did you first move to London? Because it seems to me that you did a fantastic job of capturing not only London pub life, but just London life in general, London life in the summertime. I felt it was a snapshot of just
Mm.
living in the city. Did you move to London around the time that you wrote the book?
Well, so to answer it in sort of two ways. One is I was born in London,
Mhm.
and I grew up here. But I was born in Barnet by Harrow. Mainly, I grew up in Harrow, which is in the suburbs, so very different to the kind of London you get in the book. Obviously, to Irish parents. Well, my mother was also born here, but to Irish parents, my father was born in Ireland. Um, but I didn't actually move to London, if we say London that people think of in terms of the life, etc., until I was about 28, because I spent, as I do touch on it in the novel, after I did my university studies, I ended up living at home again. And then I went to the Czech Republic for 3.5 years. So I didn't actually sort of live in London before my sort of late 20s. And I moved to sort of South London for when I got a job in this part of the city. And then I moved back towards North London around 2016, so about 10 years ago. And I was in the area that the book is set. I was there on and off for about 5 years. Um, but I would say, yes, kind of to answer your question, feeling like an outsider has just been something that's been an undercurrent throughout my life, whilst also knowing that I'm kind of not in some ways. I have various personal privileges of my, it's easy for, I'm a white man. I can walk down the street, very unlikely to be bothered, from a relatively comfortable background without being super wealthy. But I've always wrestled with this idea of being, both in and out. And I think that maybe comes across in the book a bit. I don't know, you'd be able to tell me more that I know London very well, but I also because I didn't actually live in the inner part of the city until a relatively older age, it kind of felt like I was experiencing it for the first time, even though in my teens and early 20s I spent a lot of time in Camden and parts of the city that are famous for their nightlife. But yeah, it is my home city, but on and off.
I love that aspect of it. The entire book is hilarious from the beginning to the
Thank you.
end. And I was wondering how you stay consistently funny because there's no lulls. You have the same wit from chapter one to the end. Was that challenging to maintain that energy?
Yeah, I think I mean, again, because it was written a while ago, I don't remember exactly, but I think my kind of rule, it wasn't that I set out to be like, I'm going to make every page hilarious and or funny or brilliant. Every writer wants every page to be brilliant, but I kind of developed, I had one rule that it just had to serve a purpose. And I think it's almost like working backwards that once I'd spent so much time writing badly, bad drafts, that eventually when I landed upon Murphy as the character and really spent time fully forming him, the humor came kind of naturally. So it got to a point that I kind of just knew what he was going to say. And because he was a funny character, his response to any situation would be to say something funny. Obviously, there was sometimes when I probably worked on a joke for like hours and sort of was desperate for it to really land and really work. But generally speaking, I think I just wanted it to fit the narrative. And I had one rule really, which was that it just had to be story. So there were sections of the book that I had worked meticulously on for, weeks, maybe you said months back and forth. That ultimately one day I just had to go, that has to go because it's no longer serving the story. So even the humor, I think it had to be central to pushing the narrative forward. And that I think that's kind of how I kept up the consistency was because I focused so much on that consistency of narrative. It then meant that anything that remained in was, in my view, vital to the narrative, and it because of the nature of the character, then meant the humor consistently remains a part of the flow of the text.
So then how did you balance that humor with some of the underlying themes that you wanted to address?
Yeah, I think it was kind of the same thing. As like, is it part of the story? Am I being maudlin here or sentimental? Because obviously there are underlying themes around mental health and grief. And I am a writer. I know this in myself that I have a tendency towards the sentimental, and there's a very fine line between, I suppose, let's say, poignant or affecting and sentimental. And I did have to work on chapters very closely to make sure I hadn't gone over that line, that it was just kind of, oh, reader, dear reader, I'm telling you to be sad now. Like I think there were times where I had to rein myself in or just edit very, very closely until it was, just as with the humor, I had to edit it really closely until it was like, no, this is um, this is how the characters are responding to their world, rather than this is Ronan O'Shea, the author, telling you to be sad when someone dies, or to be sad about the world. And I think that the process was the same, of just like very, very tight editing until I was happy that I wasn't telling the reader how to feel, and that they would hopefully, pick up the underlying message, if you want, for want of a better word, in that whatever section is it was.
This might be a bit existential, but it's something I've been thinking about. Why do you feel comedy has such advantages when it comes to talking about bigger themes? Why is it that it's almost like we give comedy a pass to talk about uncomfortable topics?
I think it's because it's so central to human life. I think there isn't a culture. I mean, humans, every nation, People always go, you go to any country and be like, oh, the food is amazing, my culture. Like you never go to a country where they're like, oh, food shit, except maybe England.
Except England, yeah.
But they're still kind of proud of various aspects of food, like the Sunday roast or the fact that they colonized the world and took all the best dishes. But
But didn't use spices along the way. I don't know.
no, yeah, I suppose like they didn't think of that. But I think humor. Every culture has its humor. We might not appreciate it. There's stereotypes about the British always have this stereotype about Germans not being funny, which couldn't be closer further from the truth. But so I think part of it's just that humor is how we process. Humor is storytelling essentially, and storytelling is how we process things and process the world. So I think comedy allows us to do that in a way. In a way, it's kind of counterintuitive that on the one hand, it gets us close to what it's like to actually be human. The reality that we do find humor in things, that's how we understand them. And the other, and I suppose there's certain types of comedy, it lets us get away from it a bit, the full reality. So, it's a very fine line, obviously, because there are very serious topics that don't really get satirized or a lot of humor written about them. I'm of the view that anything can be funny, but it has to be done very, very well. But there are a reason why we don't have lots of comedies about genocides because there's so little humor in certain topics that if you're very good, you can write it and do it well, but you have to do it very well. But I think comedy lends itself to that just by the revelation it has of what humanity is, and also I suppose an extra side to that is that comedy speaks truth to power. It's not trying to say what's right and wrong. It's trying to just show what people are doing badly in the world or stupidly, and I think comedy lends itself to that in a better than drama in some ways, which can sometimes feel like pamphleteering or almost political in its messaging. Comedy's kind of is better at shining a light or showing a mirror to the realities of the world than maybe more, let's say, serious literature, for want of a better term.
I agree with your points, especially about food. However, this first thing everybody says, "Oh, the food's great," and your comment about Germans not being funny. One thing I've learned in talking to people in Germany, comedy there is no laughing matter. So that's the
Yeah.
one thing I picked up. So, how did your background as a journalist? How did that help in writing a novel?
Yeah, it definitely did. I wouldn't say I was a particularly successful journalist. I got my first job again quite late. I was about 27, and unfortunately, I got made redundant about a year later. And then I was a freelancer for sort of those 5 years I mentioned when I was living up in North London, and I did some cool stuff and I had some cool opportunities, but I never managed to make it financially viable. But in the process, I did learn a lot about editing, and I had one very bad stint at a magazine. It was an in-flight magazine that I basically said I made a mistake and it was my fault, and it was like several mistakes on a copy. I think they later realized that me and the editor had made loads of mistakes and no one had caught it. But in that process of, it was harrowing at the time at being shouted at, I did learn from the sub editor, who was my sort of overarching boss, a lot about concision and how to really make sure what you want is there. So I remember in another job as well being told, like, your writing is very good, but sometimes you need to be more to the point because you only have literally physically this much space. And again, when I worked on magazines, I don't know if you know much about the way they're designed, but we use InDesign. You have like a box that's been the designer has put together, and the text has to fit into that box, like visually. And I kind of applied that to my writing, and that even though I knew that it could be, as long or short as I wanted, it was almost a way of going like, right, to get to the point, I have to almost visually get these lines down from here to here. And it's kind of just a slight odd way of working towards concision. So journalism definitely helped me become a more concise writer, and a better editor, definitely. Um, and then in terms of the book itself, I mean, obviously a lot of the cynicism around performatism that is a sort of a theme of the book is probably influenced by my time working in various news offices or magazine offices, and feeling like there was a lot of talk about the ills of the world, but not necessarily much action because it's a workplace, but it sort of fed into my slight cynicism towards um, some aspects of the media. I don't want to decry the media in full because it gets a bit of a, for want of a better phrase, bad press these days. But yeah, my experiences as well probably had some influence on me as a writer in my slightly cynical outlook or wanting to be a bit removed from the day-to-day grind of journalism.
What inspired the chapter Witty Bullet Points?
That was inspired by, I mean, one, it was I just thought it was funny because I was there used to be a very common way of writing novels because they were I'm not clear enough to know the term, but I think it's epistolary, like a letter, I think is the word. Um, Often because they were serialized, every week or 2 weeks there'd be a new one. And I kind of like the fact that I was writing this absurd novel about a man in a pub, and yet in the style of someone delivering this great, text of great importance to the world at large. Like it was kind of a joke on myself, making fun of myself. And it came off the back of me reading Don Quixote, which is written in the same form of thing, where you set out what the chapter is going to be about. So I just felt it functioned well, it worked well, and it was just kind of funny without being too central, but it just worked as a sort of like absurd addition to the style of the novel.
What aspects of the creative process do you still struggle with?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the one I struggle with is just remembering that it's a process. Like I know it's a process, but for example, I was writing today and I was just like, this is dreadful. And I had to remind myself that everything I've ever written is dreadful at the start and you make it better. And some people write differently, like they generally will. So I guess they do a lot more research or whatever, or they're just better, and they'll meticulously work on 500 words. But I think I've come to the realization that it just works for me to write as much as possible and then work backwards and weed out the story. So I still struggle to remember sometimes, like, yeah, the fact that you wrote 500 words of garbage this morning is actually just part of that process, and you just need to get it on the page. And I think sometimes I still struggle to get into that process, that mindset. I mean, the luxury I had with Murphy was that although I was a very poorly paid barman, I had quite a lot of free time. And so I was able to get into the sort of flow state of writing where, you're just churning away, you're grinding, well, grind out the bad draft, but then you whittle away at it, almost like an alchemist. Whereas now my responsibilities and my time are a lot more limited. So it's hard to get into that flow of writing for me. So I struggle with that. But yeah, I think it's the just motivating yourself and remembering that you just have to go through the bad writing period before the gold can come out.
And you've lived it firsthand now that you've seen your own book of Murphy, how the process was backwards, that you had to lay down that first just to get it out of the way. It's reaffirmed that it does work for you. You've been able to live it. You've been able to see that it works.
Yeah, I suppose because I think for a long time I wasn't sure if maybe that's just the book itself isn't gonna happen because it was written 2018 to 2020 roughly, but it was only published last year. So definitely being published does give you writers are always meant to say, oh, it's just something I do, or I always believed in myself, but you don't. You vacillate between self belief and self doubt. It's kind of a curious life, the writer, in that you are crippled with self doubt and also burdened by kind of delusion that you have to have that you will make a success of it or you will be good at it. But definitely, being published does help to remind you, like, okay, you just have to do the work. You can just do it again. It never gets rid of the self doubt. I think anyone without self doubt is a fool. So you just have to work with that. That's part of the problem with writing is overcoming those doubts through hard work and labor. But it definitely, like you say, it does help to have something published and be like, okay, in brutal terms, someone else paid money to have that there on my desk. It wasn't, someone else invested in that. So I obviously had something that was worth producing, and I can do it again.
Speaking of doing the work, author events and the promotion aspects, the marketing that comes with it, how has that shaped your career?
I haven't done as many as I would like to as of yet, but I'm hoping to do more and more. But they've been really good. I enjoy them. I enjoy talking to audiences. I'm not. I think I often come across as confident. I'm not. Innately, I'm quite a shy person and riddled with a lot of Murphy's anxieties, hence the book. But I am. I suppose I'm fortunate that I've had to work a lot to develop certain public speaking skills. Like I used to be a teacher. I used to work in lots of pubs. I've a lot of forward facing jobs in my life, and it's helped to be, not too overawed in front of groups. And I just enjoy the atmosphere, the dynamic, the energy. And it's definitely helped in terms of selling copies of the book, in terms of, um, you raising awareness of my name as an author. And it's just, you spend years and years in a room writing a book or several books, including ones that never get published. It's very good to then be able to be out and about, almost like at events, whether or not it comes to something grand in your career, to be able to actually perform it in public, or to just meet other people who are either writers themselves, or interested in writing, or are just avid readers. It's part of the reason you do it, is to be involved in that sort of in that world. But I've really enjoyed the ones I've done so far, and I'm hoping to do a lot more.
When you do a reading, I'm guessing there's nothing more gratifying than hearing that first person laugh.
Yeah, I think when the joke lands, it's like, yes, this is going to be okay now. This is working, and it worked. I think, we met. I did one in Islington a while ago, and I remember really. So my book is also in part about British Irish identity, and the section I read was about, well, partly about a brand of Irish crisps. So it was a bit of a risk for me to read this excerpt to an English audience who may not even know this brand of crisps at all. But luckily, they got the joke, whether they knew the brand or not. I don't know. I think it was clear there's a joke within there. I mean, I was talking about crisps. It's stupid. But I do actually remember the feeling of just hearing that first chuckle and being like, oh, thank God. Yeah, it's going to be okay. It's going to, people are going to get the jokes here. So it's going to work. And that is definitely a nice feeling, especially as someone who writes comedy, to have people laugh.
Yeah, and that was what first attracted me to talking to you, is because the crowd was loving it. Especially you had that one little short line about Real McCoy, the competitor chips, and I'm like, oh, hey, I get that one out, so it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah, I think that was probably one of those ones that, when the joke came to me, I was like, yes, yes, yes. So like I said earlier, I don't work too hard on the perfect joke, but definitely, I'm sure I've sort of edited towards the right joke a lot of times, and it's very satisfying then when that comes off. And it's interesting for me, actually, since the book was published, what people find funny, because obviously everyone's different. And I've had friends come back to me like, I really love this line, and someone else say they like that line, and it's all dependent on the person. And some people will get some jokes and some people won't get some jokes, and I think that's always, that comes down to audience as much as anything else. So if enough people are getting enough of the book to enjoy it, then that's very satisfying for me.
what do you miss most about Prague?
um, I think I miss the pubs. It's the kind of central to my life. But I do miss the uh, slightly more laid back lifestyle, and that includes like the way you go to a pub, and it's the waiter comes to your table and you order your beer, and it's just a bit quieter than a pub in London, or a bit more chilled. I think I miss the um, some of the parks that I used to love going to. But it was a different time. It was a bittersweet, but there's a lot of nice memories and a lot of things I don't miss. But I think I miss the some of the chilled out bars, and maybe the cafes as well. I mean, I spent 3.5 years there, and I wrote most of a book that never got published in a cafe that I used to love going to after work. And definitely it's a bit easier to sit in a cafe there for hours than it is here, because you don't spend, here you'd have to spend about 40 quid to justify being there. Whereas there you could, have 3 coffees and you're still only spending about 6 quid, which probably isn't the case now. It's over 10 years ago. But yeah, definitely the bars and the sort of general lifestyle is different.
You didn't say food. Going back to our earlier conversation, you didn't say food.
No, I mean I like Czech food, but it's very heavy. It's very stodgy. It's not something I pine for. I'd happily eat it again, but it's not the be all and end all. I've definitely had better food since then. And that's not to decry Czech food. It's no worse or better than English food, but yeah, it's not one that stands out in my memory.
Drink pairing time. Drink pairing time. For tonight's World Cup, go in. Come on, England. What is the proper pint to drink tonight?
So I'm a bit of a inverse snob in that I just think just bog standard lager is the best way forward. I'm actually just going to be at home. I'm not going to be drinking, but if I was, I would be going for Madry or Camden Hells, which is popular here in London. Basically, anything 4 to 4.6% lager is perfect. Nice and cold, no surprises. That's how I've always done my football. Don't worry about trying to get an English beer. English beers have become a lot better than they were, but in general, they're not particularly good, especially the sort of mainstream lagers. Just get a nice cold lager and sort of several of them, and yeah, Bob's your uncle, as we say. That's how I go about football and beer.
Yeah, well, Camden Hells, that's my go-to. Drink pairing one more time. The proper pint or drink, beverage, any of it for sitting down to read Murphy Who Talks.
That's a good question. I think it would probably be, well, just symbolically, because I think I mentioned in the book Frontier, which I can't find anywhere anymore. It's just again normal lager. I think it may have disappeared, or a similar a Moretti or a pint of Guinness. I don't want to be too stereotypical, but Guinness is mentioned quite a lot in the novel, and I think it does pair well if you're in a pub and you want to sit down with a book. A good pint of Guinness or Murphy's, which is now increasingly popular in London, would definitely work well. Um, but nothing fancier than that. No, no
Gentlemen,
cider. I
no
suppose
side.
would be
Oh,
my only forbidden drink.
oh, you hurt me with that. I like a good strongbow. I don't know.
Oh no, not for me. Too many bad memories of vomiting as a teenager.
It was very wholesome as well.
Thank you very much.
I enjoyed the characters and related to them, but they felt like good people. That's why I think wholesome. I just is a book you sit down and you feel good about when you read, which is not always the case.
Yeah, I think when I wrote it, and maybe it was part of what was going on in my own life at the time, early 30s, like a lot of the characters are people who are getting on okay in life, and not so much Murphy, but his friends, and yet don't really feel like they're really getting by. And I think that's a feeling a lot of Londoners had because the city is so expensive, you can't buy property, and they're just trying to be decent people with all the flaws therein. Like Donnelly is extremely flawed, but there is a decency there. And I think I wanted to get across that in my characters that they are kind of nice to be around, and very much imperfect at the same time,
Yeah.
like people.
What a fantastic note to end on right there, I think.
Cool.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rand. I really enjoyed talking about it. I look forward to seeing the final version and judging myself for how often I did this or this as we were talking. Do forgive the sweat patches. It's a
Yeah,
very,
yeah,
very
yeah. The sweat I had to. Whew. I hope we talk again. I hope I see you at an event in the future as well.
yeah, definitely.
But thank you for today, and we'll talk soon.
Cool. Cheers, Rand. I'll speak to you soon. Take care now.
All right. Cheers. Everyone has a story. Each person a scholar. Thank you for listening. Fill up that passport. I'll see you on the road. Aviento.